Last night, I went to plug in my wife's MacBook Pro, and by accident, I grabbed mine. You know, the one that died back when I was doing that Lockdown Showdown review, what, like 7 years ago? And it turned on. I had an old review on there that was mostly edited, and I'd always been kind of sad that I never got a chance to finish that review and post it. I just needed to put some bells and whistles on it. So I finished it up per kind of the spirit that I'd made it in. Added a little bit of maybe some modern touches, maybe not so much. And yeah, so here's that review. It's by no means special, but it is really cringe. Seeing as how I'm getting this sweet new set of recolors, or in Bruticus's case, original colors. In a trade for the lousy colors we've been provided in stores up until now, I felt it mighty necessary to give an update on how much better, or worser, these two are in this new release. Welcome to the video review of Platinum Grimlock and Bruticus Review Redo numbers 19 and 20, Part 1, Grimlock. Here we are again reviewing the same figure of the same character from the same continuity, the only difference being a shiny seasonal shift in surface color. So without methodically restating what was said in the last review of this guy, I can't go without saying that this is still a terrible figure. The hips don't move, there's a gaping hole in the underbelly, the horrendous tail is legs fiasco, and arguably the most notable thing about a Tyrannosaurus Rex shrinks down to a non-existent noodle, a la Machine Dramon, for the sake of a light gimmick that I totally didn't forget to mention in my last review. But the hard truth is I'm always going to be a sucker for the smooth chrome transmetal look. It's why it's my favorite subline, it's why C-3PO was my favorite Star Wars character when I was a kid, and it's why I've dramatically reconsidered my apathy for this abhorrent abomination. Slap a coat of chrome paint on a transforming turd and I will instantly want it. While the mouths on both of these open considerably more than the one I first reviewed, this figure somehow manages to suck even more. And yes, since I know you're wondering, I did return my last Grimlock, but I got this new one so I could accommodate the trade. Right out of the box, this thing already scared the tar out of me, with tighter versions of the already terrifying, oddly ratcheted shoulders of the original. Coupled with thin plastic, these tight ratchet joints are frightening. Oof. Then of course there's the issue of the shoulders scraping off chrome paint as they rotate for transformation or posing. And this thing's already starting to show signs of stress on the dinosaur toes. Legs aren't so bad, at least no worse than the first. And they even managed to sport some new paint apps, or gaps in the former paint apps, that somehow pull off an even more dynamic look than before. Less is more, who knew? Of course, closer inspection reveals that A, the paint apps are sloppy as hell, and B, where they opted to do this little detail in the joint here silver, they didn't do it on the other side. I actually went in with a silver Sharpie on my own and colored that side in. But bottom line, the worst part of this redeco is having to transform down this beast head for the first time. This is because I suspect that the torso plastic was made even thinner than the frighteningly fragile original mold in order to make room for the thick layer of chrome paint that encompasses the robo-torso. Also, when shooting this, I forgot to mention that the weapons are different too. Both the shields and the swords have this improved dark gunmetal gray color. It's a little bit more metallic than the original release. And on just the swords, the dark gunmetal color goes further up the blade than the original release does. On the Platinum release, the crimson red for the sword seems to be a little bit more washed out, and probably is just that much cheaper as a result. Just one more way this release seems to be a little bit shoddier than the original. But aside from that loss of red, the weapons definitely look a lot better. Although the shield still sucks. And 10 points if you notice that I forgot to transform the hands during the video. Beyond all that bad and worse they could pile onto this mold, you have to admit that this is one beautifully bedazzled beast of a burly bot. It doesn't have a tertiary mode, but nothing's going to stop me from calling this thing Transmetal Grimlock. I thought I was all done collecting Transmetal ones, but here Hasbro has given me another hearty helping of my beloved subline, and for that I'm eternally giddy. And to top it all off, combining a chromed out chest with a crimson light show may be one of the most beautiful things this reviewer has ever had the pleasure to judge. This toy is inexcusably terrible, but for me it was an absolute must. I can't be sure this toy is going to last any worthwhile amount of time, but I'm going to enjoy it while it does. Well, isn't that a sad New Year's resolution? This has been the video review for FOC Platinum Grimlock, and thank you for watching. Welcome to the video review of Platinum Grimlock and Bruticus, review redo numbers 19 and 20, part 2, Bruticus. Oh guys, just look. It's a color-accurate FOC Bruticus, sold in stores! Finally, for those of us who weren't worthy enough to go to San Diego Comic-Con, thank the maker. No more Megazord, no more kitchen sink colors, no more Bruticus. Starting with the combined form again, as that is truly why you're watching. I will state that this is still a mixed bag, regardless of color accuracy. If you haven't had any version of the FOC Bruticus toy before, bear in mind that it has had its fair share of overt flaws. I recommend going back and watching my first video review of this guy, because it definitely highlights those better, and that way you won't be as massively disappointed as I was. Just like my last review, I have this guy in the limb formation that I prefer, with Vortex as a leg, and Swindle as an arm. And since you're watching my review, don't you want what I prefer over what's official anyway? Right away with this version, I already noticed the improved paint apps, which define this figure so much more, even in places not necessarily visible in this form. While I'm not down with the higher percentage of goofy purple combiner stumps, it's nothing compared to the rainbow vomit color scheme. I think you can see why I prefer this deco. I can't tell if this version of Bruticus is genuinely better of quality, in contrast to Platinum Grimlock, or if I'm just used to the crappiness of the original releases that it seems that way, which means it's probably the latter. The shoulder spikes manage to stay in position much better in this version, but the waist hinge has a nasty habit of doubling back. The first few times it did that, it scared me into thinking that it randomly snapped in two, which I'm still kind of afraid of it doing. If this figure truly is of better plastic, don't let that denounce that it still feels somewhat a knockoff, and the thinness of the mold and molds therein emphasize that. This remains a spindly version of the otherwise bulking and buffed out behemoth that barrels around on the FOC game, and no color update can fix that. Either way, this version is significantly better in my book, and while not as loved as Transmetal Grimlock, it warms my heart to finally have this one. I definitely prefer my Robo Squid Arm formation for this, as well as the last one. I can add nothing else to say about this figure that I haven't already said before, other than the fact that I'm glad I didn't pay $300 for the San Diego Comic-Con Bruticus. And now on to the individual limbs. Again. This will be the first time I've had all these guys in their individual forms since I got Platinum Bruticus, so it can be a learning experience for all of us. First thing I'm learning about this guy is that the color scheme is way better than the horrid red and purple that came out with the individual release. This vehicle mode is the helicopter that lacks the ability to steer. The rotor doesn't spin very well. Actually, it spins really well. Wow, I didn't expect that. It's got a little anteater gun on the front, and it's remarkably adorable. Good gravy does Vortex look better in these colors. I can't believe what a difference a simple color scheme change makes, and I think he pulls off the tribal look much better with this muted red and this vomit pea green camo color. All in all, Vortex definitely gets a couple extra points for this color scheme, so it's a win. 1 mark for the Platinum version. Color-wise, Brawl's the one who changed the least, and while I like this dark camo green better, I still like this one. While tank mode is a stretch for either of these guys with sideways treads, I gotta say the camo look definitely is pulling it off better. Other than that, there's a couple added purple paint apps that make this one just a much better version, but the robot mode is where it really seals the deal, by A, looking completely badass, and B, having stiffer toes than this version, allowing for some actual poses. Do yourself a favor with this robot, never accidentally pop the head off, it's damn near impossible to get back on. For Brawl, definitely a step up. I still love this vehicle mode most of all the Combaticons. It reminds me of Transmetal Waspinator with the whole space shuttlecock look. This is the one vehicle and robot out of the bunch that I actually like less than the individual release, but it still doesn't look bad. Something I didn't mention in my last review, these goofy leg wing sections never really peg in right, especially on the left side where there's a peg that prevents it from getting into position properly. I actually bought a third Blastoff to replace this purple one in the trade because I like this one so much. His colors are just terrific. And because I finally made the modifications to this guy so that Bruticus could hold world's smallest shockwave. I did promise you it would happen. This robot just isn't as enjoyable without the complementary purple and yellow scheme. So I'm really glad that I'm pulling off this deal with that third Blastoff to keep this version. However, that does mean that there are 3 different versions of Blastoff in my abode at this time. But I can't forget to mention that I have to go back! Anyway, it's worth noting that the mouthpiece on the individual release is painted silver, and this one isn't. That sucks. And while this one has some highlights painted that this one doesn't, this one just seems to look a lot better with the highlights it does have. Swindle makes the change from the yellow and purple I love so much about Blastoff into this wartime vomit brown. While this does pull off being just more preferable in the long run, especially for the combined form, I find myself missing the yellow version already. though not enough to buy a second one. I still hate having to transform this guy into the vehicle mode most of all, but it definitely is one of the best vehicles out of the bunch. It's more or less a tie between this guy and Blastoff for my favorite Combaticons, and that's only because this guy makes a really good leg and arm, and Blastoff doesn't really do either of those very well. Robot mode still fails hard at conveying the awesomeness of the box art for this guy, but at least you can identify his facial features for this silver paint they slapped on there. And the gun looks loads better in silver too. Even though I think I like the yellow and purple better, the paint detailing added to this guy definitely improves his look. Though that doesn't help the paper thinness of this guy's robot mode. Ultimately, I do like this version better. So once again, it's another step up to the Platinum Bruticus. Onslaught. Onslaught still sucks.
How is that possible?
Onslaught's vehicle mode still sucks.
How is that possible?
Onslaught's robot mode still sucks.
How is that possible?
Onslaught is still the laziest bastard of this whole game,
It's been absorbed.
while simultaneously looking the worst of all. All things considered, the Combaticons are made vastly better by the Platinum Release's color schemes, with the exception of Blastoff, who looks remarkably better in purple, and Onslaught, who's dreadful either way. So we gather to say our goodbyes to the original store releases of Bruticus and Grimlock, in a way similar to how we bid farewell to Lego Stater, by destroying them. No, I'm not actually going to do that. I need these. This has been the video review, Platinum Grimlock and Bruticus, Review Redo, numbers 19 and 20, parts 1 and 2, and thank you for watching. In order to make room for the thick layer of chrome paint that frighteningly fragile, but here Hasbro has given me a hearty helping of my favorite subline. To top it all off, well, the Transmetals never... And while I do see the irony in wanting a War Machine combiner that's less boisterous, the first few times it did that, it scared me into thinking that it randomly snapped in two. Stand up. Good boy. Capable of taking down battalions of smaller warriors before the big guy shows up trying to get smacked down. And while this mold cannot convey the brutal power of other leader class figures, I just hate myself though.